Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for your time that you have spared to join Conversations with Wandy this morning. We're very excited to have you here. We're going to give our colleagues 5 minutes before we start. Until then, enjoy the music, and you're looking forward to a very long session. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining Conversations with Wandy this morning. We're very excited to have you here. It's exactly 5 minutes past the hour, and in our usual fashion, we are going to begin. Once again, let me just take this opportunity to thank each and every individual that has joined us this very nice morning, and we're looking forward to a very engaging conversation with yourself. Now, for purposes of data protection, I'm just going to let everybody understand that this meeting will be recorded, and we are going to start the recording right now. Great. Allow me to then introduce my panelists today. We have Stephanie Wamboy, who is Director for Employee Wellness Activities within Nightwise HR. Stephanie, feel very welcome. Maybe you can say one thing before we go into it.
Thank you so much, Wandy. Probably you can activate my video.
Yes, please.
And hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be on this platform. I'm really looking forward to have this engaging conversation. It should be quite enlightening for us. So thank you so much, Wandy, for having me on board. We are excited.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Now we have Liz, who is an employee experience expert and also a practitioner within industrials wellness. Liz, let's have you introduce as I'm turning on your videos. Liz, you're having a bit of a challenge. Sorry about that. Liz is gonna join us in a few minutes as we start with this particular session. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you very much. Liz, we have you back.
My apologies. I didn't realize I'd gone offline. So as I was saying, I'm happy to be here today. I'm looking forward to this discussion. And I think it's a really critical topic. And thank you so much, Wandera, for having me as one of the panelists today.
Alrighty, so Liz and Stephanie, you should be able to now turn on your videos. Great, now we can begin this very lovely conversation.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Fantastic then, ladies. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody that has joined. This is Conversations with Wandy. If this is the first time that you're joining us, we thank you very much for your time. If you're one of our usual participants, again, we're very grateful to continually have you in these conversations as you do bring life to it. Today, we're going to talk about how to handle redundancies with dignity and in a very humane manner. For the sake of those who have not met me before, my name is Wandera Kweyu, but everybody just calls me Wandy. So let's get straight into it and talk about how redundancies can be done in a more humane manner. Now, when we had this conversation last month, for the people that joined us last month, we spoke a lot of legalese and procedures and processes on how redundancies are done. And this is normally the first thing that comes to mind when we are doing redundancies. We talk about the process, the legal challenges, the business needs, but today we want to put in that human being that is behind that process that you're talking about. So when we define redundancy, we say redundancy is a process by which at the fault of not the fault of the employer or at the employee that a job loss occurs. You know, it's a very big, wordy statement that just kind of tells you somebody is going to lose their job. The gist of it is somebody is going to lose their job. And I just want to start with you, Stephanie, to just understand which are the human touch points that are immediately arising to you when that definition comes up.
Thank you so much, Wandera. I really like what you said, that in essence, redundancy is just like a really nice way of saying that, oh no, you're going to lose your job. It's just like an umbrella term that is put out there. And in essence, some of the touch points that we see here, and it's quite important for us to recognize, is that we're supposed to actually be able to have some consultative processes that go into the redundancy process in general. And then we're also supposed to have some support, a human-centered approach in general, as you said, because in the last section or in the last session that you guys had, you guys were talking about the legal aspects of a redundancy. And today we want to address the human-centered approach towards that. So what does that look like in terms of the supportive arms that we can give that would be centered for the person? That would be centered for the person that's about to lose their job. And so I think some of the some of the elements that we would need to consider are that we need to have some collaboration, we need to have some consultation, and we need to have some support. So those would be the three main areas that we need to touch on or look into as we think about a redundancy process as an organization.
And there is a lot of things that come into play when you say the human touch points. And then when you're thinking about this, and an employer, like I've said, is more often than not looking at what the business needs, making sure that they're not getting in trouble with the processes that are coming in. And here you are bringing up some human touch points that are available just from the definition of redundancies. So Liz, you could probably tell us what an employer should start thinking about, should start planning at these particular stages of a redundancy process to just make sure that it is very human-centric.
In terms of planning, an employer should actually be cognizant of the communication they're putting out there. So initially, most organizations should actually have a procedure in place for redundancy. It shouldn't really just be done ad hoc. There should be a procedure in place. Ideally, there should be a timetable so that those who are going to be affected by the redundancy and those who are actually going to be retained are actually aware of the process. As much as possible, the process should be very fair and transparent, because I think part of what leads to a lot of trouble is where people feel that those who have actually been let go, it was not a fair process. They're not certain about how actually this happened. Also, the other thing we should remember is that redundancy is about the role. It's really not about the person specifically. And sometimes when that is not well communicated, what happens is the employees end up thinking that this was unfairly done. Sometimes they think it was in the lines of gender, it was in the lines of their tribe, it was in their line, there was ageism involved. So the planning is around the communication. The communication should be very simple. The communication should be very compassionate. The communication should be with a lot of care around the human person. And it's also a time when there should be leadership. There should also be very dynamic leadership in leading this conversation. And this dynamic leadership who are leading the change on redundancy should also be the ones who are also emotionally intelligent to the fact that this is impacting people's lives. It's impacting their livelihoods, it's impacting their families, it's impacting the larger ecosystem who are depending on that person financially. So there should be a lot of emotional intelligence and patience in knowing that this person is being impacted, and it takes a while for the information to actually sink in. And because for the leader who's actually putting this out, they've actually been thinking about it for several months sometimes. But for the employee, this is the first time they're hearing of it. So there should also be a lot of patience in delivering this information, because it is hearing about redundancies is when organizations, people who are affected sometimes end up going quickly to file a lawsuit. There could potentially be strikes around it. The repercussions can be really detrimental, just because if the messaging wasn't well done, if it wasn't simple, if it wasn't employee-centric, people take it really badly. And actually the repercussions, even on the employer brand, can actually be very negative.
Yes, and I really like what you have said, Liz, at this point, that there is quite a number of repercussions that come with not having a message that is simply put, a message that is put as if it is put towards a person for purposes of them letting it sink in good time, for them to just digest. You can see that there is opportunities for you to remain with a strong employer brand as you are going through a redundancy. Do this while you're being an employer who values the people that are inside of the business. And I like what you've said about emotional intelligence of the leadership that is handling this particular type of process. And I just wanted to hear from you, Stephanie, when we say emotional intelligence for leadership that is handling this process, what are some of the things that somebody could just, have in mind as you're going through this process of redundancy, that, hey, I need to be socially aware, I need to know how my relations work with these people? What are some of these things that just come to mind for the leaders that are handling this kind of processes?
Okay, I really love that question, Wandy, because there is actually a scientific process as to our behavior as we normally react to things or how we respond to things. And normally there is about five triggers, give or take, that normally affect someone when you go through grief or loss. And let's remember that redundancy is still loss. It's just that it's a loss of a different kind. It is job loss. And so grief is inevitable. You'll actually end up experiencing a lot of stages of grief or a lot of different facets or phases of grief, even as you digest the process. And so if we start from a scientific standpoint, where we are looking at, as for our people, what are some of the things that we need to ensure that we are reinforcing in them, or what are some of the triggers that we could increase or decrease to make sure that they do not have a reactive but more of a responsive approach towards redundancy. And those triggers are actually, I'm going to list out four for now. So this is control. Sense of control is so important, because that's the number one thing that you lose when you are told that you are losing your job. In essence, you feel like this is not something that you can control. It's something that is outside of your locus of control, and so it can be quite distressing. And so in essence, as an organization, when we're talking about an emotionally intelligent way of approaching our people, we would first have to work on increasing the sense of control. And so I'm sure we will delve into that a lot more as we go into it. But there are ways that you can help your employee to regain a sense of control over the direction that their life is taking. Secondly, would be a sense of certainty or uncertainty. So that's also something that would be a serious trigger for someone who's losing their job. You'd end up not really knowing how the future is going to turn out. And we all know how that anxiety is. Sometimes even the anxiety can still be overwhelming, even when you know what's going to happen in the future. And so how much more that is like turned up or leveled up when we don't even know what is about to happen. And so again, it's important for an employer to consider how to increase, again, certainty in the employee's life. And then secondly would be social connection and relativity. And I love what Liz has talked about, branding, just like the brand identity, or like a brand attachment to the brand, the sense of culture that is there, and the sense of people, the sense of organization, or the sense of being together. And it's important to ensure that sense of inclusivity. Remember when we started, we said that this is a three-part process. That is, there's the consultation, there's the collaboration, and then there's the support. The collaboration part needs to greatly be there, where we still retain the sense of identity or the sense of culture it is that we have as an organization. If people are at the center of our culture, then we carry through with this process, even throughout the process of redundancy. Because what is common is that you normally find that this people first strategy is kind of takes a backseat when we are focusing on redundancy. We're like, you know what, let's just do what needs to be done. The hard things need to come first before we can focus on the good things. So that now, I mean, after we've focused on the redundancy, now we will fix the culture in the place. But statistically speaking, that will cause a lot more harm on your employees than you retaining the sense of brand identity all through. So social connection and relativity will be the third thing. And lastly, it should be fairness. Liz again has talked about that consistently we have to reinforce to our staff members that the process, you know, that communication that Liz was talking about, it's important for you to be transparent and say, okay, so we have been, over the past couple of months, we have been considering option A, B, C, D, and this is the conclusion that we have arrived at. It is because of A, B, C, D that this is the only way forward. And as a result, we'd like you guys to process this with us, and we will transition through this process together. And so in essence, that now kind of like takes away the subjectivity of the matter, and you keep on reinforcing that to the employee by consistently addressing the facts of the redundancy and not necessarily taking an emotional or a personal approach. I don't know if that makes sense, in the sense that we talk about emotional intelligence, but then we're talking about not necessarily personalizing. Be empathetic, not sympathetic with your staff, so that you keep on reinforcing it, that this is not really about you. It's a larger thing that is in play. It just affects you, but it is not because of you. It's not about your productivity or your personality or your, you know, the other factors that you mentioned. This is just something else that is beyond your control or beyond you.
Yes, that's a very insightful statement to make, because you sit here and you say you're dealing with a process that causes a lot of anxiety, and yet you need to be able to give this employee some semblance of control, some semblance of certainty, to speak with them with empathy and to really communicate with them. And when you look at the process of redundancy, it's so rigid in its approach because of the legalese that is around it. You're told send this notice to the Ministry of Labor, wait for this particular time, then send another notice to the staff, then tell them the process of selection, then give them this type of payment, and then send them out into the world. You know, this process in itself is very, very rigid. And then you start to wonder, other than these legal requirements, how can we then have such consultative processes be a little bit more employee-centric and have larger ways where we can have these kind of conversations that are emotionally aware, so that an employee can have, you know, the way you're saying, the semblance of control, there's some certainty around it, ownership around the process. So Liz, could you tell us what other things can make these consultative processes within the redundancy process to be a little bit more human-centric, as we are dealing with a very otherwise rigid process as per our laws?
I think Stephanie covered a lot, but also let's also just remember that redundancy is intensely stressful. So because it is intensely stressful, an organization that is human-centric could also begin to think around what could we get in place in terms of maybe external providers who could support the staff during this process. And the staff in this case, we're talking about the ones who are exiting, the ones who are remaining, and also the leaders who have had to give the information. Because even for the leaders, before they even put out this information, it is very stressful. Many of them will struggle with anxiety and sleeplessness for a long time. But yes, organizations can reach out to external partners who provide additional services around counseling. This could be everything from financial counseling, because when you're starting to think about payouts, especially for those who get lump sum payouts, it's not everybody who's going to be very financially responsible with the payout. So there could be that financial counseling that you provide as a support to the ones who are exiting. You could provide the mental support, again, to the ones who are exiting, but also to the ones who are remaining. Because again, the ones who are remaining are going to be struggling with a lot of anxiety. They're concerned about their own job security, and that will actually, at the end of the day, impact the organization in terms of performance and productivity. Then, of course, the leaders as well. We tend to forget leaders, but they're also human, and you can't miss several highly impacted, negatively impacted by having to, in essence, take away someone's livelihood. So again, support should be also targeted at leaders as well. And so we're talking everything from financial advising, we're talking about mental health advising, mental health counseling, we're talking about outplacement services. Outplacement services are those people who provide that coaching that will help that person move beyond the redundancy to now beginning to realize what happens, how can I bounce back in this economy? How can I survive this experience? I'll be okay. Basically, outplacement services help people realize I'll be okay beyond this, whether I'm going into consultancy, I'm starting a business. And for the most part, you also find organizations that say, hey, have the financing for this. This is actually why we're making redundant. But ways to work around that. Organizations actually have the capacity. Organizations actually have the capacity to even negotiate reduced rates. So that sometimes they can come in and say, look, we may not have much, but in terms of just maintaining our brand out there, showing the goodwill towards our people who we're exiting out, let's see what we can do with the providers in terms of getting services that are at a shared cost. Some they can take on the cost. They can also negotiate reduced prices so that the ones who are actually leaving will continue with the outplacement even afterwards. So there's a lot that can be done. Organizations can be creative as much as possible just to show that there's goodwill, and the redundancy was something they could not actually, it was out of their control. They had to do this for the sake of the organization.
Yeah, and those are very, very well stated sentiments here, that you can actually give something that can be sustained, so that you don't just tell somebody, hey, you're losing your job, tomorrow go for this outplacement service, and then bye, see you never. You know, it leaves somebody in this space where you wonder, did you really think about me? Did you really just, think through about what I am going to go through after this? And this is where my next question comes into you, Stephanie, when you're sitting and you're saying, what is the mental state of these people that you're dealing with in the organization, and what other mechanisms can an employer adopt to just make sure that these processes are also very sensitive to the mental health of the persons that are going through it? And by the persons that are going through it, I mean all of the employees, because the leaders are going through this, the people that are leaving are going through this, the people that are remaining are going through this. So how do you just take care of the mental states of the people that are going through this process?
Wow, thank you, Wandy. I love that Liz has introduced us to like the three categories of people that we ought to make considerations for or towards when considering redundancy. There is, of course, the affected person that is experiencing the redundancy itself. There is the rest of the staff that will be retained because as much as they might not be losing their job, they are experiencing this with their colleague. And then there is the leader who ultimately has to make that decision. Because it's so interesting when you're separated by a boardroom table from the people, you don't actually meet the impact that your decisions have when you're not necessarily the direct person that's giving the information. And so now, considering those three people in mind, and considering also the triggers that we talked about before, Liz has also told us that we are supposed to, in essence, provide some assistance or some support to help people to go through this process. And she's outlined some of the factors that should be part of that support. There is the usual career transition services, that is like preparing your CV, and just those conversations about how to enter the job market again, how to get another job, how to make yourself more marketable. And that is excellent because that addresses the trigger that we talked about, the sense of control and the sense of certainty to some extent. It kind of like gives you some confidence, and it repairs your sense of, because when you're told that you're no longer needed, truth be told, that is hurtful in whatever shape, way, or form, no matter which language it is delivered in or how much rosy the terminologies might be. It is still hurtful in essence to feel like you are not needed. And so thinking about addressing that, because a behavioral scientific approach would mean that you have very clear outcomes that you want to achieve, or very clear things that you want to address when you are coming up with a program, right? When you're coming up with like an assistant program, like you're saying. And for the mental well-being, let's remember, and I've seen that somebody has also said the same thing in the comments about financial literacy. Finances and anxiety have a very strong correlation. And so it's really, really important to have those financial consultations. Remember that having a support program or an assistant program is an ideal situation. That is great. But even more so, it's important for an organization to invest in high quality support services, those ones that can tailor make or have individual consultations with people. As opposed to just doing a generalized training, it would be more beneficial to have a one-on-one touch with each of the persons that is being affected. And if you can get, as an organization, if you can get a provider that can provide those kind of services, then you would have a greater investment, not only towards the well-being of those ones that are being affected, but even those that are around will see how you as an organization has taken this personally. We as well have seen that has more success when you sit down with an individual. For example, you get them a financial specialist and they sit down with them and they have a consultative process about, here are my finances, this is where I am in terms of my debts, in terms of my expenses, in terms of my monthly budget. This is the income this is the last amount of money or the income that I expect before I leave office. And now this is how I would probably, now as a financial specialist, would be like, this is how I would recommend that you proceed. And that in essence really cuts down a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the even depression that can come from just having a lesser income. Then one more thing that Liz had not mentioned that I want to add on, that it would also be beneficial to have a fitness and nutritional specialist as well as part of this outgoing process. Because remember, when we are in depressive states, not necessarily depressed, but when we are in depressive states, one of the first things that takes a big hit is our physical well-being. And our physical well-being really affects our mental well-being. once you start sleeping in all day and missing meals or eating meals that are not well thought out, or just going on a spendthrift as well, consuming large amounts of one particular type of meal or one type of food, or starving yourself in essence, or not even losing your appetite and not being able to also have a sense of feeling to like move or live or go forward, that will hinder and slow down the process of your recovery as well. And so it is always good to have somebody because our bodies, I like saying that our bodies are our mirrors. They really betray us. They reveal when we are not doing well, when we are stressed, when we're anxious, it will always be showed in our bodies. So it's good to have somebody also talk to them, not some of the ways that they can consider their physical and nutritional well-being, to make sure that they actually have the backing of their bodies to be able to go forward and do those things that they want to do. And so I said finally already, but as Liz had said, the counseling aspect of it, very, very, very important. You cannot, this is just something that you cannot overlook, because and while we appreciate as industrial psychologists, we really appreciate HR, it's really, really important to have a behavioral scientist as part of the process, a therapist, a counselor, somebody who's trained to professionally listen to people and their concerns and their needs, because they will keep on reinforcing the right narrative to them. They'll be able to listen to all of their problems. I would highly discourage a manager sitting down to listen about how the employee that he's just delivered the news to is supporting 5 siblings and some sick parents, and there's not really much else that is going to do. No, avoid that. Let's cut that. Let's have a professional sit down with your staff members, and not only them as well, even for your leadership, because it will take an immense toll even on their abilities as it is. And so we need to come up with, in essence, we need to design a specialized or a customized assistance program that would be relevant or just perfect for your organization, your people, and you make sure that it encompasses the 3 categories of people that Liz had talked about: the person being affected, and the people who are being retained, and the leadership.
Amazing, amazing. What it is that you say. You notice that there is a lot of facets that make a person. It's not just the financial literacy. It's not just the mental state. It's the physical. It's everything that surrounds people. And I'm liking some of the comments that we are putting out. Let's not just wait. From James Mooley, he tells us, don't just wait until it's redundancy time. That's when you start financial literacy programs. If you can be able to be in a spot where this is something that is practiced regularly, it really does help. And I see Judy is giving us suggestions here where she's saying we can use other longer term support mechanisms that can be able to reduce the stresses caused by job loss. We can put medical cover, extend it to the very end. When we can use company services, to buy goods for employees or sell goods for employees at reduced costs. If people are in banks, when you release people, let them have the loan rate, interest rate that they had while they were there in the bank. And you can see there are many ways that we can always be very accommodative and humane towards the people that we are working with. Because one of the things that's very clear about the practice of people and culture is that first, it is people. And it is a culture that we're used to. So it's something that we're sitting together to consistently develop as a group and, as people who have humanized one another, right? So I'm just calling out to all our people and remind them, everybody on the call, you can always type your question on the chat box, or just send your question to the Q&A session, or raise your hand and we'll be able to get to you and let you hear your views or pick up some of the questions that you have. For those that have joined in the middle, this is Conversations with Wandy. We are today speaking about how to deal with dignified redundancies. And I have with me Stephanie and Liz, who are all industrial wellness experts that can be able to assist us to deal with redundancies that can make it more humane in the processes that we are working with. Now, there's something that I find to be very interesting when we are dealing with redundancies. So we've gone ahead, we've spoken to people, we've told them some things here about, okay, now this is what we will do, this is what we'll do. But that conversation that is the actual termination conversation, where you sit to the person and say, hey, look, these are your benefits. They are according to the law. I've extended your medical cover to this date. So goodbye. And this is your certificate of service. So goodbye. Such a final a lot of thought before the same is done, simply because you have put them in that training where they talked about financial literacy, eat well, sleep, everything. You're going to have a very final conversation with a person that is going to change their life significantly. What should managers, what should an employer do to prepare for such conversations? I mean, what should they be aware of, Liz? What are these things that just are so pertinent that must go into the process before you sit down and just have that final termination conversation?
As indicated earlier, one of the things that's really critical is that not only is the manager conversant with the reason why the redundancy is happening, but there should have been a seamless agreement among the leadership where all the leaders are speaking the same language. There should be no ambiguity in any of the leadership, whether they're front-facing or whether they're in the operations and back-facing, because part of what really sometimes messes up with the redundancy process is that there's a manager sitting across from an employee and giving all this information around, okay, this is the redundancy is happening, we're finishing with you and all this. But the other leaders could actually be giving separate information out there. So there should really be a very seamless conversation. There should be agreement ahead of time on the messaging. The messaging should remain very simple, very consistent. It's really critical that this is something that they're speaking with one voice. The other thing that is also sometimes really where organizations drop the ball is in just not realizing the patience necessary in repeating to employees, especially the ones who are affected and are going back out in the marketplace. They will have several questions, and there needs to be a lot of patience in answering the questions over and over, because for many of them, they are going through a traumatic experience. And for that reason, they're actually having mental blocks. So you may have said this in a group setting at the initial process. Somewhere along the line, they have got their first letter, their second letter. You may have had all these programs we've spoken about around the mental support. You've had the financial literacy, but don't be surprised if the individual comes back at you again and asks a question that you think you already covered. It's because they're going through a lot of mental blocks. And then, as Stephanie mentioned earlier, they're going through an oscillation of the grieving process. So they're going through everything from accepting to denying to going back to panicking to negotiating and bargaining. So it's a very tumultuous time. So the leaders should, again, just know that they should be very patient. They should answer, there should be a mechanism to answer the questions employees have. And as much as possible, this mechanism should not be an online platform. That one can be there, but again, because this is about human centricity, have that front-facing, engaging conversation. Be patient with this process, because again, having just a place where you're saying, look, here are the answers we've given, go to this website, we've answered everything. They're not reading, they're having mental blocks. So for the most part, you're losing them. So again, have that process in place, that mechanism to answer questions, because they'll have them over and over. They'll have questions around internal vacancies. Can they fill them? Sometimes they don't realize they need reskilling. You've tried to explain that we don't even have the capacity to train some of you right now, much as we know you need reskilling. So they'll have questions around that. They'll have questions around redeployment, like, is there a possibility of working at another branch? And yet sometimes it's not a possibility for everybody to be absorbed in another branch or in another capacity. They'll have questions around their benefits over and over. They'll be wondering, are my benefits still intact? Is my pension still intact? So just realize that they are in that state, as Stephanie said, there's a lot of grieving. And then also another thing managers should be cognizant of is there are levels of accepting what's going on. There are people who are actually going to respond with a lot of anger. There are people who are going to respond by being in denial. There are people who are going to respond by actually withdrawing. There are people who are going to respond by actually accepting and being pragmatic, and be ready for those who also will respond with violence. What have you put in place for the ones who could be violent? Because again, that is a reaction for adverse. It's because of the adverse stress they're experiencing. So I think there's so many levels to this, and organizations need to plan well for it, need to mitigate it early, and know that there are all these things. Employees are thinking, some are actually, we always call it in psychology, their responses to trauma. There's going to be the flight, the fighting, and the freezing. And the most dangerous being the ones who seem to withdraw and are okay. Those tend to be the ones who later could be having a lot of depressive incidences. You could be hearing about suicidal ideation. Again, you want to show that you were concerned about them. And for those ones, you actually want to give extra care in terms of providing extra support around their mental wellness. Because again, the impact on your brand remains, it's long-term. It's an impact that at the end of the day, it's interesting that statistics show that for the ones who actually remain behind after a redundancy process, up to 25% of them are going to exit the organization within the first year. So as much as some people were retained, the impact on the brand, both internally and externally, is actually highly detrimental. And how you treat people means the ones who are remaining behind, they're already looking for exits. They are looking for windows and doors to exit from, because the way you treat the ones who left actually shows them how much you care. Regardless of what you were going through financially or structurally, they realize those were just like me. And if that's how you treated them, I'm sure I'm next. And so before you know it, you wanted to retain some people just so that you keep the organization going. But guess what? Up to 25% or even more are actually going to be leaving as well.
Yes, and those are very interesting statistics that you put out there, because quite a number of employers, they are very, very conscious of doing it legally correct, making sure all the notices went out in time, the amounts were paid correctly. They did what I call the cosmetic taking care of the employees. I had a webinar after that, and then, I took them and their CV was written and goodbye. That's it that they're doing. What you're forgetting is that your brand is impacted by all your brand ambassadors. And quite a number of employers forget that your brand ambassadors are also internally in the organization. They are outside of the organization. They are people that are aspiring to join your organization. So when you're in a space where there is a lot of vulnerability from you as an employer, because one thing about redundancies that's very clear, it shows a vulnerability of the employer. The fact that you're unable to keep people in the organization is a vulnerability of some sort for you as an employer. You need to come out and communicate it very strong to make sure that not just your brand survives, but the brand ambassadors are willing to remain as brand ambassadors within that particular context, whether it is the ones that have left or the ones that have actually remained in the organization. And this is what leads me to believe very firmly that this is not something that can just be done internally by the managers in the organization. It needs some sort of specialized training. It needs an understanding of, what is available in the market currently, Stephanie, that employers can be able to utilize while they're going through this very, very sensitive process.
Wow. Thank you, Wandy. Liz actually has pointed out a few excellent things, and we have mentioned some of them even as we go on. We've said that number one, there are, of course, the transitional services, the career outplacement services that are there. And you have to make sure when you go to the shop, or when you go for shopping for a career transition or human-centered approach, human outplacement services, you need to really be on the lookout for a holistic package, something that not only addresses some of the categories of people that we said, the different types of well-being and the different types of issues that are there. You need to make sure that all of it is kind of like inclusive in one, and that you have time. Time is very, very key. you are willing to invest not only your money, but your time as well into allowing for this process to be rolled out within the organization. So we're looking at a package in essence. The difference between an employee wellness program and an assistance program is that an assistance program is tailor-made to deal with certain very specific needs, while a wellness program would be like more general on just well-being issues of people. And so you are more looking for an assistance program than you are looking for a well-being program, because you have very specific needs. Now, this kind of program needs to address all of those factors: the financial, the nutritional, the mental, and the career transition. And something very key that people forget in financial well-being or in the financial support services is that it's not just about financial literacy, it's also about the money traps that come after job loss. That's something that we have seen is quite necessary within the industry. As Kenyans, we are so prone to pyramid schemes, and we're so prone to get rich quick schemes. And when you are at even a more vulnerable state, where you actually are anxious and you're not necessarily thinking clearly or in your best capacity or using your full capacity to reason, then you might find yourself falling privy to all of these conning kind of schemes. And so it's important to also to make sure that you get a program that addresses that. And moving on, transitioning into that, as somebody was also talking about the retained staff, it's now also important to invest in their well-being. I find that as much as we're saying, yes, these are the products in the market, it's important to make sure you're putting an investment into retaining the culture of the organization. Remember when we said before, we said that many organizations say that people are first priority, but then when it comes to addressing the redundancy process, they kind of like focus on the process and then they focus on the culture later. It's important to remember that this is a transition. And so also have some people culture experts to be able to advise in essence how to transition for the whole organization. Where is it we want to go? What it is we want to achieve? What it is we want to have reflected as we do this? And what I like about even psychology as a science is the fact that it is a science. It is not magic, in the sense that there are very, very strategic things to do. Like we're saying, there are triggers. There are 5 triggers or 4 triggers that are there. So whatever program it is that we're designing with these triggers in mind. This is coming to address this. This is coming to address this. This is coming to address this. Because A plus B will result in C. So it's a very, very 1, 2, 3 step kind of process where you can actually see the results that you want. So other than EAPs, other than people, cultural experts to be able to actually advise on the matter, I'd also say some of the issues that I believe you did mention, Wandy, in your previous conversation, should be Judy when she was talking about just making sure that you have like a medical provider that extends the cover, just having those kinds of support that are longer term for your staff members, to give them a longer grace period than probably would be expected.
And you say very profound things, and one of the things that I just want to single out for the employers that are sitting here today is that there is an actual difference between an employee wellness program and an employee assistance program. You find that most of the employers in the market are very particular about saying our insurance has a wellness program and you can call this toll-free number and everything works. There's a whole world of difference that exists that a human-centric employer should be able to realize that they can put these things into play to help them to be able to deal with situations that come, especially situations like this when it comes to matters redundancy. And I'm seeing on the chat box here that there's quite some discussion that's going on. We are seeing people speak about the HR teams to be considered when dealing with these particular issues. And I really have to admit that, yes, more often than not, the HR person is the one that's just left there as a warrior on the side to just do the process and make sure nobody gets sued, nobody gets violent in the office. You're just doing everything. And when you leave, there is always that question of, what about me? So yes, I do agree that the mental state of the people within the HR process that are carrying out this, the HR department that carrying out this process needs to really be put into place. And I'm seeing Mercy saying that she really does like the nuggets that are coming on in here, and that there's Mwaro and Mina who are agreeing that this is indeed an insightful conversation. And we're seeing that Lewis is asking a question here: what strategies can be put in place for that employee that is remaining after a redundancy? I see, Stephanie, you've raised your hand, and then Liz, you could also assist in just answering that question as we are going through. I also just want to remind everybody that you can always type your question in the chat box or the question and answer session, or raise your hand and we will be able to get to you and respond to your questions. Yes, Stephanie, then Liz.
Thank you, Wandy, for getting back to me. I just wanted to comment again on the issue of HR. We actually do consider HR as part of the leadership. Remember, again, we said, like I was saying before, that there's a boardroom that separates the decision makers from the actual people who go on to deliver the message. And so HR is absolutely part of that aspect. When we go forward and we talk about the leadership, please let's also ensure that we are including HR in that bracket, because HR is absolutely part of that. You know, it's like a very interesting pillar of the organization. It's leadership and it's people. It's like normally kind of like there in the middle. And so in essence, we would not leave out HR. HR is part of the process. But also just to chime in addition to the question that you said, as I allow Liz to also have a go at it, would be, of course, to make sure that we are making, when we're talking about the retained staff, we also need to come up with a wellness program that would be addressing the psychological well-being of those who are remaining behind. And so in essence, it would be quite beneficial for you to have a mental health professional, practicing therapist or counselor, either one of those two, who can actually be part of your team for a specified period of time to be able to address the needs of those who are there, to consistently address their anxieties, have them, if they want to just talk about things, that there should be a professional that you can adopt for a specified period of time to be able to provide that support during that transition. I believe that that would be an excellent way to go. And of course, just not adopting a wellness program for your employees. Can we do some research when we're transitioning with our companies? Can we ask our staff some questions? Can we find out what their problems actually are? And then can we sit down with the professionals who know how to design specified programs to fit in, or to custom fit to the needs of your employees? Can we now invest some time to actually roll out that program, allow people to get comfortable in it, allow people to transition? Liz, when we were beginning, said that as a leadership, you've been ruminating on this redundancy issue for probably months on end before you actually come and talk to your staff members. Let's not rush the process for your retained staff. You can't come and say, oh, our talk is gonna be sufficient. A 1 week talk or a 1 week or 1 month activation should be sufficient for my staff to actually get back to health. I mean, you talked to a professional. How many sessions do you need to feel better? No, let's also invest some time and give these programs some time to people to become comfortable, for people to actually be able to adopt the cultural change process to be there. And let's do research. Let's ask people questions. We make assumptions about what people need. And it's really, really important for you to start from a baseline level.
Yes, absolutely. Liz also takes a stab at this particular question that we have.
Actually, there's not much to add. I think Stephanie has covered that really well, really comprehensively. And I think just to back her up, I think a good mark of a good provider in the marketplace are providers who are going to tell you, look, I am not coming in to do a training. I'm not coming in to do a quick, in fact, some organizations will even try to ask you if you could do just something on Zoom, and it could be just 1 hour. It will actually not help, or even just a one-time workshop will not help. She has said it so well. The best programs are tailor-made to the organization, because each organization is unique. The stresses, the pain points are very unique. So for the most part, it took a while for the organization to get to where it is. So in mental health, we know it will take a while. It takes a while for your mental health to deteriorate. So it will also take a while to get to the place of healing and wellness. So let's actually give providers that time. And just again to cover some of what you said earlier, Wandera, I think human resource are a great partner. They're a great partner to the leader, as you're saying, Wandera, and yourself, Stephanie. But at the same time, it's helpful to have an external party. An external party, for the most part, is coming in with new objectivity. Again, from my personal experience, sometimes employees need to see that external party as that ally because they are already seeing HR during a redundancy process. My goodness, very few of them are actually seen positively. As much as they've been really working hard for the organization, that's the time that a big chunk of the organization, most of the staff are not seeing you positively. Yeah. Most of the staff don't even want to talk to their managers. So it's really helpful to get external providers because there's some objectivity, there's that sense of that other person they can ally with, an external person. And then again, when you're thinking about vulnerability around finances, around their mental health, around their family, because also again, for us who practice in the market, that's the time all kinds of worms are coming out. People who have a second wife and they never revealed to anybody, all these other things. Let me tell you, that's the period where you actually want a person who's out there because they need to vent it out, and they don't want to necessarily vent it out to a person who they feel is part of this. At that time, there's this feeling of a thing against the organization, against HR, against all these people they've been working with. So it's helpful to have an external ally because that person can take the hits and can help with that vulnerability because that person has a lot going on beyond even just the financial concern. There are all these other people plus their grandmother who depends on that money, and they need to just have a place to, first of all, start with that. As a matter of fact, you find that those sessions usually start with just the grieving. I tell people they have to grieve because if they don't grieve, for the most part, it's going to happen later and they're not going to be effective in the marketplace. That cannot happen internally. They cannot grieve because this is a place where they have to be stoic. At work, they have to be very stoic, very professional. Sometimes that's the person who's busy carrying hakietu, but they also need another place where they can just be themselves and say, hey, you know what, as much as I'm fighting out there for all this group of people, we've probably put out a lawsuit. I have stuff going on with my life and with my family. So I think we've all touched on all this, but at the end of the day, try to have an external ally. There's a purpose to it. They've actually come up with a program that they're experts for a reason. They specialize on this. They do this on the daily with other organizations, with individuals, with families. There are different layers to all this.
Yes, and I really do like that because when you say that the external party is an ally, because they give these people an opportunity to have a neutral ground where they can be able to be free and vulnerable. And it's something that is very, very necessary within any organizational setup as we are dealing with difficulties like redundancies. I'm just going to jump into the chat box and look at some of the questions that are there. We thank you, Jane and Elizabeth and Wainaina, who are stating that the session is informative and interesting for them. And we have Maro asking, what is the most practical notice period an organization can inform staff about unintended redundancies? Now, the law puts it as 30 days. That's what the law puts it at, 30 days as a notice period where you're saying, okay, I'm going to do a redundancy 30 days. Personally, I think you should have it for longer, especially when you have known what it is that is going on, because what the law says is just a minimum of 30 days. It doesn't give you a maximum. When you're dealing with people, you don't expect them to fall within the legal frameworks, because I don't just automatically on day 29 wake up and say, all right, now I'm good, I understand, get me redundant. There has to be a period where people are able to observe, understand. And that's why for me, I've always put it out and said, let these programs be there even before you get to difficulties like this. Organizations should learn to adopt wellness as a practice of success in an organization. When we are thinking about people as human beings, one of the statements I make to every person that has worked with me, it's very impractical for you to leave the person that you are at the door, then enter into an organization. It's borderline, in my understanding, borderline impossible, because the being will always show in your doing. It's very difficult for that to not occur. So I personally do tell people organizations should focus on wellness as an actual success metric within an organization. When we're looking at some of the other questions that are here, before I pass some of them to our panelists, I see, is it okay to ask a question about legal redundancy at this time? If yes, how do we go about the taxation for gratuity and severance pay? The one thing I want to mention is that gratuity is not part of the legal requirements of payments when it comes to redundancies. A gratuitous payment is just that, a payment that an employer has decided to give you as a gratis pay. So it is not part of a severance redundancy package. But I'm not saying that it cannot be included if your processes within the organization has it. Because if your processes within the organization say that when an employee is exiting, there will be on top of the legal payments, a gratuitous payment, then that will be there. Now, on severance pay is actually taxed 100% like a normal income. So there is no changes that are put in place unless you're working for a government parastatal or a government body or a quasi-government body that has had good relations with the taxman and they have made exceptions. Generally, these are actually taxed on a normal scale. There's somebody, Jen, who says, I have worked for a donor-funded program which ends September this year. A proposal was already submitted which would go either way. There is anxiety as to whether this proposal will be successful, and if successful, any realignment possible. And if successful, any possible restructure or realignment, what do you advise? I think this, I'll leave it to my panel to take that question as I just read through the others that are remaining. It would be great to have another session where we run through calculations and redundancies. That's very well noted. Mercy echoes the sentiment. Abdul Karim is echoing the sentiments of Mercy. This is well noted. Is there a requirement by law to give a notice for intention to declare redundancy before the actual letter of redundancy? Yes, this is a requirement. You need to send out an intention of redundancy to the Ministry of Labour for 30 days, and this notice cannot be paid off. It must be served by every person. Before cancelling, besides the counselling and mental support training, make the trainings of conversation practicals, e.g. how to write your CV, interviewing, entrepreneurship skills. Some of the people have not been in the job market for a while or could be starting a business. Those are very valid comments from you, Mercy. Thank you very much. And Wanaina says that I concur with the trainers and other than the legal aspects of redundancy. It is paramount for an organization to come up with a tailor-made program to support the affected employees. Thank you very much, everybody, for your sentiments. And you can always type your question in the chat box in the question and answer session, or raise your hand and we'll be able to get into it. And I just want to throw this question back to my panelists, where somebody has said, let me just take it again. The person that the proposal that been sent out, the anxiety that is coming, the possible restructuring that is coming. There's a lot of very many complexities for a human being in that very loaded situation. What are some of the advice that you would give people in this kind of organization?
Liz, do you want to have a go first?
I'll just mention briefly, I think we have tackled some of this already, but I think for that person, they could also just start with their own self-care. Just because sometimes we have organizations that are not cognizant to the fact that they should actually try to have some kind of employee assistance program in place in advance, even before there's a redundancy, as you've said, Wandera. It should just be something that is also prioritized within organizations. But where that is not available, there's been no talk around providing any counseling, coaching, or anything like that, especially since it sounds like it's still 50-50, the person should also begin to prioritize their own self-care. They should really begin to harness their networks, their personal Their personal support system, they definitely should talk to their personal support system about what they're going through, if they're having sleepless nights. And then earlier, as indicated, the way Stephanie said, the body keeps score. So what do you want to do in terms of just beginning to watch out around even body aches and pains? Because severally, when your body is starting to ache and pain, it's actually talking to you. You may be thinking that you're okay, but your body is beginning to tell you, I'm really unwell, because maybe the anxiety is really high, but you're not addressing it. So what are you going to do in terms of managing that concern, that anxiety, whether there's sleeplessness, loss of appetite, increased appetite, health issues? Just how are you going to begin to take care of yourself? And interestingly enough, if you don't take care of yourself, it's also going to come out in the form of your relationships with your family as well, the form of your relationships with your ecosystem. So again, taking care of yourself is a way to mitigate you not becoming that poisonous person that's now difficult around your family and everyone else, and poisonous even. Sometimes we find that people even become self-sabotaging at their work. Even before there's been a redundancy, now they're self-sabotaging just because they're not conscious of the fact that they're really anxious and they need to address how to take care of themselves, regardless of what the organization is doing for them or not. And I'll just say, if there's anything else you can add, Stephanie, feel free.
That was pretty good, actually. That was excellent advice. There is, of course, you have to take responsibility for your own self. Responsibility lies with you and it starts with you. And so self-care is such an important aspect. What I find to be quite common in cases of anxiety would be the fact that, of course, is the uncertainty, it would be the uncertainty of what would happen. However, in this particular case, she has clearly outlined that there are just two options of what would happen. They'd either go for it or they'd either not go for it. And that really does simplify or kind of like help you make whatever alternatives you have become a lot more easier for you to see. It's important for you to break down what your anxiety is about. Then now you see it very clearly. As Liz has said, if the option, if things turn out to be that it's a no, then it's important for you to begin to invest in your relationships, expand your network, begin to think strategically about what the next steps would be, what the future would hold. First, think about you before you can think about the rest of your colleagues, because again, responsibility does start with you. Start thinking about you as you go on to impact the rest. If the options are yes, what does that look like again? What would we need? What steps do we need to take? I think thinking about that, and that is an excellent step we take with staff when we're doing counseling. It would be very good to like go forward. In essence, it's like go into a meditative state and think about the future. If this is the alternative, what does my future look like? What am I doing? What am I happy about? What am I stressed about? What are the challenges that I am experiencing there? And if it goes this other way, how do I look? How do I turn out? How is this happening? And so in essence, you begin to deal with that. And anxiety does need an expression. Wandy, as Liz has said, it needs an expression. Your mental, it's good. I mean, your body is an excellent way for you to express your anxiety. You can walk it out, you can run it out, you can work it out, you can do all those things. But then at the end of the day, it's not only your body that will store the anxiety, your mental well-being as well. You can have one friend you can talk to, but even them, eventually they'll get tired, because she said the answer is coming back in, the term, I think the contract is supposed to end in September or something. That is a bit of a distance, and it would be quite overwhelming for you to just keep it on to someone, or keep it on to your friend where you're just consistently talking about yourself. You can turn out to appear as somebody who's very self-centered. And so it would also be good, in an effort to invest in your own self-care, look up some mental health professionals, look up for support groups, join some groups where you can be able to have and find the right tools to be able to address what it is that you're feeling, even psychologically. And in essence, make also some suggestions to your team members. You can do this together as well.
Absolutely. And I think there is this one thing that comes out clear in this in the answers that have been given to this question is that you have to be whole first. You have to be whole first. When you bring yourself to a situation when you're whole and well, you have a better fighting chance of surviving when there is a lot of stress that is around you. So focusing on self-care is a very key principle that every person should be able to have, and which leads us to this very paramount question when I'm saying it's the last day. Everything has been done. You've cleared your desk. You've been given everything, and now it's final. It's over. What can employers do for employees after the payment? You know, where we're saying, fine, we've extended you that 1 week, that 1 year cover, or maybe yours ended in October. So we leave it up until December because the insurance was running up until that date. Anyway, what are some of those things that an employer can be able to do for an employee, Stephanie? And to you, Liz, wondering, what are those things that an employee themselves can do for themselves after that particular day we are done? How do you care for yourself, and how can an employer care for the employees after the fact?
Okay, thank you, Wandy. So we've actually seen some employers would end up also extending the support services longer than the last day of office for the affected employee. We've seen that some employers are actually considerate enough to keep providing like psychological support services for an extended period of time to these staff members, say maybe 2-3 months after the redundancy has occurred. Additionally, other than just offering support as an organization, it's good to also activate, even, you know, like for instance, if you're letting go of some staff members that are quite excellent in even what it is that they do, it's also good to activate an internal search to ensure that you're keeping up that connection, reach out to connections and find out whether, you know, just sharing some of the abilities of some of these people, if they are competent for other opportunities that are there, push them their way, connect them to the job market scene. We've actually even seen an organization like kind of like organizing those networking events because they were prepared. They were working prior, organizing networking events even for some of the people to be able to connect, to be able to kind of like find the steps to move on forward, and then continuously keep connected with these employees. Because again, branding, culture, like we talked about, those are things that you should not lose sight of as an employer. So other than extending all of these other support services that are normally available, or making sure that these employees have access to them for an extended period of time, you can also connect them internally within, or you can also connect with them, keep connected with them all throughout.
Amazing. And now to Liz, what do you do for yourself after this is all said and done?
I think we've spoken about some of them already. You want to definitely prioritize your self-care. That's one I'll always say. You want to take care of yourself, because even after a redundancy, you still remain. There are people who thrive after redundancies, and it's because they prioritize themselves. So prioritize your self-care. Try to have a routine. Because you've already been used to waking up to get to work, whether you're going physically or you're working from home, regardless, you're already used to a routine for productivity. So keep a routine in place so that you use that time to, whether it is job searching or putting in place some kind of business, whether it is training or learning about entrepreneurship, it's really critical that one doesn't use that time after a redundancy. Of course, they can stop and grieve. That's okay. They can stop and grieve, but even in that grieving process, people grieve differently. There are people who grieve by being active. There are people who grieve by taking time out. And then after that, there should be something to jumpstart you. That's where we're talking about if you need external help, if you need counseling, if you need that social support to help you not grieve to the point where you go now into depression. You're so depressed where you become hopeless. You're not actually getting up. You're not actually functioning. So a routine is really critical. Get help where you need, get your support in place. Additionally, you want to definitely spruce up your CV, as we said. So for that one, if you have to invest in yourself and get additional coaching, get an additional coach, because if you've not been in the marketplace for a while, you don't know the job market. So it's really helpful to have that help around the CV writing, the interview prep, whether just reaching out to recruiters, because these coaches, several of them are going to give you tips on how to reach out to recruiters, how to utilize social media like LinkedIn, again, to reach recruiters, how to put yourself out there. Because again, you're going back to the marketplace as a brand, as a person, and you have a lot to offer. So again, coaches now, that's where coaches are really critical. Some are part of the outplacement process. Some of them are actually working independently as bounce back experts. Reach out to them. Part of that payout that you get at the end, utilize some of it on yourself. Get coaching on business if you want to go into business. If you want to go into consultation, there's still a lot to learn. Get training. If actually you were made redundant because your training, your skills were not up to date, we're in a world of technology. Get the training you need. Utilize that time. There's so much training out for free online right now. There are trainings that are affordable in the marketplace. Get some training. And finally, take stock. Take stock of your assets. Every one of us came into this world with a gift or several gifts for some people. There's something that you're valuable for that you can offer in the market. We've seen after the pandemic, after 2020, how many people started passion projects and are actually earning incomes from them. So it's not the end of the world when you hear about redundancy, when you are made redundant. Some people actually thrive after this. Some people have told us as professionals in the marketplace that they wish they'd known earlier, they would have actually left employment earlier. So just go ahead and take stock of what are your strengths, what are your transferable skills. Some of this can actually earn you an income separate from employment, or even if you're going back into employment, you could be going back at a stronger place. Leverage, use that coach to help you leverage so that you go in from a stronger position where you're actually sometimes even able to earn a higher income because you're now actually, you have a greater self-awareness and you're getting back in the marketplace from a place of strength. So there's a lot one can do. Beyond just mourning, which is okay. It's okay to grieve what you've gone through, but now take control and begin to invest in yourself and move yourself forward and make the most of this experience. It's a difficult experience, but make something out of it. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I think
Wandera is frozen.
Yeah. Is. But meanwhile, as she comes back, I can probably add on to the list and say that it's important for an employee to remain professional all through as well. Just that aspect of retaining your professionality will end up being something very valuable to you because you're actually still in the job market scene and you're going to interact. And so in a sense, also what employees should avoid doing in terms of redundancies, number one, don't even vent at your boss, don't vent at your manager, like just avoid that completely. It might give you temporary relief, but ultimately it could potentially end up risking your image in terms of your professionalism. You could turn out to look like you're somebody who's very bitter, that you're actually overwhelmed and that you're not coping well with this transition, even though that might be the case. And so if at all there is an opportunity for you to have some support services, utilize those services, my friends, like utilize those services. I think Kenyans have actually highlighted, we have been hearing a lot of Kenyans highlighting the fact that they find some of these mental well-being services to be quite expensive. And so when your organization is providing these support services, do your most to maximize them, because they can come at quite a cost when you are going to look for them individually. And additionally, also, you shouldn't criticize your manager as well, or your former colleagues or your former bosses. Of course, when we're during that time of where we're grieving the job loss, we can find ourselves really discussing things that we should not be discussing. And again, we risk looking very unprofessional. We risk looking disloyal. And even a future employer wouldn't necessarily be in the position to hire you because of how you seem like somebody who's bitter and hasn't moved on. And then again, don't take the job loss personally. It's not about you, it's about the organization. So if at all you can keep on reframing your perception toward it, you'll be excellent.
Amazing, and those are very valid points that you're putting across, and we're seeing quite some discussion on the chat box that I would like to take as we are winding up. I see Kennedy is asking, when working as a contracted employee in an organization that their HR tells you she is not your contact HR, how do you go about issues of when you're laid off, rendered returned, and not forgetting your contractual terms to explicitly clear the subject matter? I know the situation that you're dealing with, where you have where you're working for where your workspace is not your actual employer, you've been subcontracted to that organization. This means that both your workplace and your actual employer need to be able to come together and provide an environment for you where you're able to understand how you can express this kind of thing. I do agree that there are some situations where this kind of opportunity is not available, but the best idea is to always remember who your employer is and go back to your employer. Now, I'm seeing Sydney is asking if you're declared redundant and then they hire someone else to continue with the role. Is this a basis for legal action against the company? This is a very loaded question that you have to be able to understand. Is it the same position that has actually been rehired, or it is a different position? It's the same position with added responsibilities, an expanded position. Is it that what has occurred? Is it the person that has come in of a different skill and a different delivery that it comes into that area? I always advise before you take legal action, and that's why this is some of conversations like this are very important, is that you're able to take a step back and have perspective as you're looking at some possible that yes, the position looks the same, but it has been expanded in many ways. So I would ask you to just look at it objectively and see whether or not that it is indeed the actual same position that has been rehired. Eunice says, thank you for answering my question. I understand severance is compensated for completed years of service. How about employees who have not completed a year of service? Can the service be prorated? Absolutely, yes. And in fact, recent court decisions are showing that you should indeed prorate this kind of pay. So the advice I always give employers is always prorate, because the court decisions recently have been quite inclined to prorating this kind of payments. Is it okay to encourage is it okay to encourage the affected employee to talk to someone, e.g. a friend, family member, about what they are doing to get consistent support outside the workplace? As you can see, our panelists have said you can't do it, but the best advice will be always to seek help of a professional so that you don't end up overwhelming the people that you are talking to and causing strain to the relationships that you currently have. I see Judy saying, I think if employers have the option of offering voluntary early retirement, they should go for it. This gives an employee the option of taking matters into their own hands. That's quite true, because this is where the semblance of control comes back. So early voluntary retirement programs are actually quite nice. I think I've answered the question on what a VER is a voluntary early retirement. To the panelists, is it possible to discuss the contrast of being declared redundant and a voluntary early retirement? I mean, the declaration of a redundancy is the employee first has no option, because that then becomes an involuntary termination, because you don't actually want to be terminated. So it becomes an involuntary termination. A voluntary early retirement is more of a voluntary end of an employment, where it's almost similar to a resignation, where you say, I give you my notice, I am going to resign my employment, and we go ahead. A voluntary early retirement is saying, you know what, I'm going to leave employment through retirement, which is my own choice. I'm exercising this choice to do it. When it comes to a redundancy, it's more like you're being told, hey, this is what you're going to do. Right? So I'm loving the questions that have come in today. It's been a very interactive conversation. We have 6 minutes to the clock, and I just wanted to hear some remarks from our panelists before we pen off. We can start with you, Stephanie, and then with you, Liz, and then we can be able to pen off.
Okay, yeah. So just in conclusion, this has been an awesome and an engaging conversation. Thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to actually bring forward some of the wellness needs or well-being needs that are so paramount to a part of an organization's activity or day-to-day. I want to stress out the fact that the well-being of your staff members should actually be something you invest in well prior on to any redundant process. As Liz was saying throughout the conversation, that it actually really, really makes a big difference when an organization already was invested in the well-being of their staff members, so that the transition is very well strategic. It is a strategic transition that ultimately happens, and it takes the amount of time that needs to happen. And we need to kind of like evolve, because people's needs today are quite evolved from organizational people needs that were there a decade ago. We are in a different age, we are in a different time. And if you're not sensitive to some of those factors, you will find yourself also on the other side of the legal arm. Of course, even today, there is a larger conversation on psychological damage and how employees are attempting to sue organizations and proving the extent of psychological damage that an organization has put them through. And we find that actually in this case, we're seeing that some of these court cases will find winnings. And while all of these things are things that Kenya is catching up on, it's important for you as an organization to be well positioned, beforehand, like way before any of these issues hit the market scene or become issues that we are experiencing here as a country as well, even in terms of our legislative processes. So invest in your employee well-being and get service providers. And again, something that Liz said that I absolutely agree with and resonate with, and our company also does the same, would be the fact that invest in quality well-being services, guys. Like, it's not just about a training, it's not just about a facilitation or a facilitator. Get quality well-being services. The impact that you get from quality well-being services will really put back the money that you've spent in essence. Like, you will see a lot of productivity, and you'll see a lot of investment coming back in terms of what you have put in. And so let's be keen and let's keep having this conversation. I'm thankful for COVID. I remember the conversations with Wandy has also been, of course, highlighting that this is also a factor. And COVID has actually brought a lot of well-being issues to the forefront, and we're very glad about that. At least that's one good thing, that now companies or organizations are willing to make those investments. Take your time, do your research, get people that can offer you quality services, and then have it be an investment. Don't look for a quick fix, get long-term investments for the well-being of your staff members. Most providers would end up saying we would also give counseling to like your family members, for example. Imagine if you're extending now, if in a redundant situation, those are some of the services you're still extending on to your employees, just like medical cover. Let's think about our people in these strategic terms. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Stephanie. As we hear your conclusion, Liz.
Thank you so much, Wandera. I think this was such a timely topic. It's one that, as a progressive nation, we really should have this kind of conversations, and also more openly, because I find that a lot of these conversations we've been having at the water coolers with friends and family, but it's time for them to be out here. And so I thank you for this platform, not only for this very critical topic, but on so many things that you actually bring to the fore. In terms of just human resource management with organizations, you're really pushing the envelope in this regard, and we're thankful for that, Wandera. Because of people like you, we see there's a change. We actually see that there's actually a new narrative in how people are speaking. People are becoming more aware. These forums are actually making people, they're enlightening and educating people on how organizations should actually be managed. There's what we have been accepting, but through conversations with Wandy and forums like this, we begin to push this nation to what we can be in terms of managing our people, in terms of handling our employees at work, because these are the same people who make the bedrock of the society in terms of the families and the community and the society we call our country, Kenya, and of course for the larger community, which is the African continent. So I'm just so thankful for this conversation. I'm thankful for what you're doing, and I applaud you and I say, keep going, keep going. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
All righty. Thank you very much. To my panelists for sparing your time, to my audience for your attendance and always being as lively as possible. I'll take just that one more question that's pending on the chat box to say, is there a legal requirement for HR to declare intention to roll out voluntary early retirement to the Labour Office? Absolutely not, as this is a voluntary process and not an involuntary process of termination. What is required is to always file your returns with the Ministry of Labour, the Labour officer, to say that these are the number of people that have left my employment either voluntarily or involuntarily. And I just want to thank each and every person that has come in here and had a conversation with us. It's been very engaging as always. We've loved having you, and we look forward to seeing you next month, same time, same place. And it has been a great pleasure. Remember to follow and like us on our socials, and have a very lovely weekend ahead. Thank you very much, and goodbye.